so I can start. Thank you very much for coming. How many of you attended morning session? A few. And unfortunately, there is also a parallel session on education going in another building. So we sort of have to manage. But here is second part, what I consider second part, because those who attended, you've heard how important is sort of outreach, how important is sharing our research in accessible way to others. Doesn't need to be, we are talking about systems and control, so can be systems, can be control, but speak to, as I always say, to broad spectrum of the public, and in the way that everyone will at least get an idea and will understand. So I'm saying that I already said in the morning that I've been doing that for already probably 28 years in Lawrence, Kansas, but I always do for fifth graders, because in the United States is determined that age 10 or 12, between 10 and 12, is that kind of barrier that makes you go one way versus another, either science or. So this is why that fifth grade is like target in the United States. So I've been doing that, and I have proclamation of the state of Kansas. I have proclamation for doing that every April by the city, and absolutely is, and we have competition, we have everything what one can imagine to make that importance of studying science and engineering and mathematics. So I've been doing, as I said, for high school students at every ACC and almost for every CDC in the United States. And if it's outside, it's more complicated. And I've been doing at few at Ifac, like we've done that in Madrid, we've done that in Prague, we've done that in South Korea. So we've done all those Ifac congresses for high school students very successfully. And we reached, when I calculated the number of students during the last 17 years, we started first in 2000, is over 10,000 students we reach, and speakers, over 200 speakers, and now almost everyone would like to contribute. In other words, to speak what I call plain talk, to inspire, to motivated young people. Here you don't see so well, but this is a sample of the program. So you can see a wonderful, I always try to have diversity. So, and I always try to show that control is a field that spans all science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So those presentations cover different areas of what we do for research. And not only, I also care to bring young people as passionate, enthusiastic presenters, but also very distinguished professors. So let us start. As we know, panel members are, but we will start, agenda is with presentation. You already heard as plenary speaker. And so you already heard at morning panelist, and you are now third presentation, and just showing you, because how many of you attended Iven's plenary talk? Good. So this is supposed to be like a small version and speaking about maybe the same topic, but to broad community. Is it correct? Yes. Yeah, so let us start. You can, I hope that you will enjoy. And then it will be discussion, what you will change, what you think is okay, what you think that would be maybe better to improve. So you will be playing later on in second part, very important role. Thank you.
Thank you, Bozenna, and thank you for that show of hands. I am going to talk about exactly the same topic, but I'm going to take in a totally different approach. And in fact, I don't think I have but one slide that overlaps between the plenary and this talk. So it won't be totally new for those who have heard the plenary, but certainly it will look a little bit different nevertheless. So this is about systems engineering for water systems. I call it the outreach mode. The emphasis is not at all about the control and the mathematics that go into it, but it's rather on why do we do it and why can systems engineering make a difference at all. And it's also an approach where I don't talk about money and economics, but where I more talk about what I would call the real reason why you're doing it, basically how do you make a difference. And water is something that is essential to all of us from so many different aspects that I'm going to focus on the one word agriculture here most, but almost the same story can be told for cities, for industries, for the way we do leisure, the way we look after our environments. Economics plays a role, public health plays a significant role. I left one important word out in defense. All our water systems are called critical infrastructure. So the security and the privacy and how we deal with these things are very important. But my key main message is that if you care, you should actually measure what you care about. Then you should try to make a model out of it so that your decisions are the best possible decisions. And then you can actually manage what you care about, and that makes a closed loop. And the feedback that's embedded in there means that it's something special, that you're in some sense chasing your own tail, makes it more complicated, and makes it that you really need experts in that field to actually start thinking about how it actually works. And so I'm going to give you a glimpse of that, knowing that you're all experts in what I would call feedback. The reason why you don't see the word control here is because normally control gets a very negative connotation in a large public. Social experiment, social control. Control means a bit like you know everything and it's too harsh. Whereas management is normally considered more softer and easier going, and hence the word management. The other reason is it's easy to remember. Model, measure, manage. 3 M's, 3 alliterations. Hopefully it sticks a bit longer in the memory of those that listen, hence the word manage and not control. I don't make an apology for that. It makes a huge difference when I talk to large audiences that I don't use the word control. Anthropocene, so the era of man. And you will forgive me that I use the word man in a negative sense. The only threat to life on Earth is man. And that's kind of a statement, maybe slightly over-exaggerated, but yeah, I'd like to make a point that the stewardship of our planet, as we are doing it right now, is extremely poor. And for the sake of our own grandchildren, we need to do better. And water is just one aspect of it all. And I will tell you a little bit more about it. But if you doubt that we actually are in an Anthropocene era, look at those 3 facts. All Earth processes put together move a lot of material. Erosion, water, hydrocycle. Well, people move more material, especially through to mining, actually an order of magnitude more. What is more surprising is that we actually move more water than the entire hydrocycle moves in every year. And the last one that really blew me away is that the energy waste of human activity is larger than the background energy waste of the mantle of the Earth. So the Earth processes and the heat we lose through the Earth is actually of the same order of magnitude as the heat we lose in our energy production every year. Final observation that we often forget, but weather is very chaotic. The long-term averages we call climate, because it's chaotic, it's a dynamic process, it actually is quite precariously balanced. And our collective actions are making a difference. And hence, you will have to live with climate change, and as engineers, we are partly responsible for it, so we can look in the mirror and say, yeah, badly done. We haven't actually looked forward enough, but we can look forward enough, and we can do something about it, and we can at least be resilient to what is coming, because the train is gone, and the inertia is too large to stop it. What if we don't do anything? Which is a potential. You can say, let the scenarios that we run now, let the economics, the market rules, everything that goes on now seems to be working reasonably well. Why can't we continue the way we are continuing? Well, most reports tell us that if we do that by 2050, we will have to double the amount of irrigation water, but we only have already used 75%. So there is no way of doubling, because it will run out. And there is no sustainable water available to do that. Moreover, as a consequence of that, about half the world's population, we're talking here 4.5 billion people, right, by 2030. 4.5 billion people will be living in severe water stress. That means that sometimes they will have less than 50 liters of water a day for at least a month. And 2 billion people will not have 50 liters a day ever. That's double what it is now. That's the type of world we're looking forward to. So I'm not sure about you, but I don't like that. Am I alone in saying this? No. This has been public domain knowledge since 1997. I have been giving talks about this topic since then. And it has been in every big report that I've seen ever since then. And here are the World Water Reports. This is the United Nations. You can't get much more diplomatic than that. But since 2003, in every World Water Report that appears every 3 years, in the most diplomatic language, they use the word crisis every time. We live in a water crisis, not in a water crisis from a physical point of view, but in a water crisis from a management point of view, an economics point of view. And the words that they use, although they are diplomatic, are blunt. Water use, water infrastructure are unsustainably managed. You can find that sentence in all of those reports. The investments, that's the last one, 2015, the investments are inadequate in both the developed and the developing world. And the one that is the topic for today, basically, is that not in every one, but in at least 2 of the 5 reports, there is double the food production without an increase in water, and that's a must-do in order to be able to meet demand. Can that be done, or is it just wishful thinking? Well, luckily, we are in a situation that nobody really cared about water. There are actually many jurisdictions in the world where water is a God-given right that you don't pay for and that cannot be measured even. But where we do not measure about it, we know that we're wasting it in pretty good quantity. If you live in India and China, for every liter you extract from the environment, only 40% of it will actually reach the destination for which you extracted it from the environment. And that is true for both the domestic, the industrial, as well as the agricultural use of water. So 60% of the water is wasted. Well, you could actually halve that or more and get somewhere towards that double production without extra water use if you want to. You wouldn't be able to do that if you live in countries like Australia, where only 30% of the water is wasted. But if you then add to the fact that the other losses are on the farm and they're equally large, you're actually starting to see that maybe there is a chance of doing what we've been asked to do by these United Nations water reports, that if we could cut those losses, then there is actually enough water there, even within the sustainability margins, to be able to double the production of food without using more water. But we have to change our ways, because this water infrastructure has been there for, in most cases, hundreds of years, in some cases, thousands of years. Like I was reminded by Professor Leguo yesterday that China still has an irrigation district running from the time of Christ, so 2,000 years old. In Spain, you have things that are 1,000 years old, since the Moors lived in Spain. Some go back to the Roman days. So these things are old and still in use today. This is a very simple one. It's the first irrigation district that we automated in Australia. It only has 74 kilometers of canal. It has about 156 farms. And if all the farms asked water at the same time, we could actually need about 50 cubic meters per second. On the top, though, this little arrow, blue arrow on the bottom here, left-hand corner, can only do 2 cubic meters per second. So scheduling will actually be required. All the little red stripes are places where we can change the flow of water. This is a purely gravity-fed system, so if the water comes in through the blue arrow on the bottom, we can stop it at the gates, but in the end it will run out at the bottom, and there are 11 bottom points in this system here, 11 places where the water will simply run into what is mainly a desert place and will not be recovered afterwards. So the whole idea of running the system is to provide the farmers with what they want, when they want it, without having too much water falling out on the bottom side. Oh, there should have been a video. Let me try again. You can't hear what, but this shows you roughly what actually is happening. This is a farmer here opening up a gate. Here is someone changing the flow in the channel by reducing the friction. And these are our automated gates that you can see with their solar power panels and their automation thing. That's the replacement of it. So that gives you a bit of an idea. That's actually not that old. This technology using these manual operations along channels is used everywhere in the world. So there you see someone operating a drop bar structure in less than safe conditions, I would say. If you want to have measurement, well, we have measurement in Australia. These are these wheels that you can see in different conditions. And the top one in the middle, the farmer forgot that he dropped a 4x4 bar in the mechanism, so that won't measure much. By the way, we have found frozen fish in those devices as well. So as you know, frozen fish swim in water and they can get stuck there and then nothing works. The middle one, the farmer obviously forgot to maintain his measuring wheel. Also, that one doesn't measure very well. And then on the right, bottom right-hand one, you have one that is maintained reasonably well. And even so, this wheel will not measure better than about plus or minus 20%. And as far as the infrastructure is concerned, this is the so-called closed gate. So there is no water flowing through this channel in so-called conditions. So that's the present condition. This is not abnormal to find it anywhere in the world in this way. This is all from middle of north of Victoria. In around 2002 to 2004, these pictures have been taken. Here are the replacements. So if you don't want this type of environment, you have to change it. You have to put new measurements, new technology in place that can do this better, can do this much more frequently, can do this without manual intervention. And here are some of the gates, some of the bigger ones, which are about 3 meters in diameter and 3 meters wide. You see one here being placed in the middle in the wet conditions, so even when the water is flowing, you can change these gates in and out. And here you see one sitting that goes from the main channel, which is just at the back here. That's the main channel, and that's going onto a farm, which is an undershot gate, fully automated. Typical modular structure. We have solar power, because there is no power provided in these irrigation channels. We are about close to more than 1,000 kilometers away from a power station here. And we measure there basically the water flow as well as the water levels with a lot of other variables that we use for irrigation information work. That's the replacement you have to do. You have to invest in some new infrastructure to make a difference in these systems and to bring them basically in the present era rather than in what I often call Sumerian technology, because in fact the manual operations go back all the way to 3000 BC. In order to make a difference and working it all together, in the end, there are a few things that really matter, but you have to be able to work with the farmer. Farmers take pride in their operations, their irrigation decision. They are the custodians of the land. The other partner in there is the management of the supply channels. They are basically the ones that are the custodians of the water and the custodians of the assets. So they want to sweat their assets to the maximum possible. They want to get a good price for their water, and they want to use the water as sparingly as possible because that gives them a future income, if you like. You provide them with the information to be able to make decisions. The farmer making a decision on whether his farm needs water, yes or no, and that you do by measuring precisely what's happening on the farm. So in this case, in the middle here, you have a device that measures water flow, water moisture content in the ground as well as the evaporation that goes through the plants in order to see how much water deficit is on the farm. That water deficit is communicated to the farmer, who can then make a decision whether he wants to irrigate or not. He can ask the HQ for that irrigation event, and the HQ will tell him whether he can have that water or she can have that water, yes or no, and at such time that they can have it. If they agree on a price, the channels will be set up, the gates will be open, the water will flow onto the farm, and then if the farm is automated, the farmer will actually distribute that water onto the farm to the plants as required. That's a closed-loop feedback system. It works on a much tighter timescale than is possible with human intervention, and it makes a difference. It actually cuts the losses in half, or better than that even. Here is a bit of an example of how it actually works on the channels. The channel itself is the worst possible pool. It's the highest pool in the system, leave alone for why that's called the worst possible pool, but it's the first one in the beginning that I showed you. It's basically this one where the blue arrow is on. That's the pool we're talking about, and this is basically the one that has the most variation in water level and water flow. And you can see in one day, which was the 1st of January 2005, which in Australia is middle of summer, it's about 44 degrees centigrade, and we have about 15 flow domain changes in one day. In the past, you could only have one, and a farmer had to ask 3 to 4 days in advance to make a change onto their farm. We now let all the changes happening, and in principle, within a span of 2 hours, we will satisfy that need. And you can see that that is happening here the case. We go from about a third of the flow capacity, half a cubic meter per second, so a quarter of the capacity is a 2 cubic meter per second capacity in that channel, to about 3/4 in one day. They would be totally unheard of. In principle, in the old days, that would have taken a week to be able to make that change. In the meantime, that pool has a water flow level that is changing. That is the blue line there, and it's changing between -8 centimeters and +8 centimeters on the set point, which is probably more than I like, but it's a bit more aggressive controller that they have implemented. But if you look at the past, in the past they would have ±30 centimeters there. So it's a significant improvement on the quality of service for the farmers. And the quality of service is to do with the water level. The tighter the water level is controlled, the tighter they can command their land. If the water is too high, the flow will go too far on their land. If the water level is too low, it doesn't go far enough. And both are bad for irrigation. Both actually lead to inefficiencies. Tighter control gives you better regulation. The advantage of the first pool is that there are actually no farm offtakes by regulation. So you can actually take a bit more liberty with the water level, but nevertheless, I find this a bit over the top. 287 measurements. From your point of view, interesting to note, nothing is periodic here. It's just sampling by event-based, and the actuation events, there are 133 actuation events on that main gate, which is completely impossible to have been done by a manual operation. Normally, they would come once a day, and for smaller gates, once a week, to set a water level in that particular gate. So this is a different way of you can do it. That gives you huge benefit on the channels, but by no means enough to be able to make a huge difference on the farm. And on the farm, you have to also invest and get to understand how your orchard, how your plants are behaving. This particular case, Pink Lady Apple Orchard, belonged to the University of Melbourne. We've never been able to grow anything there but juicing apples, which go for about 2 cents a kilogram. But to this ingenious device here that, I'll see my mouse, that sits over here, we can actually look at the stress of how sap moves through the plant branches. And if that stress is high, that means that the apples need a lot of water, or the plant needs a lot of water. And it's a good indicator that there's something untoward or that they need more water. On the other side, we have depth level sensors here that will feel the moisture in 4 different zones, inside the root zone and outside the root zone. And we also use the wireless signal to check how much moisture there is in the canopy, which the more moisture is in the canopy, the more our wireless signal will deteriorate. That's actually is a good indicator that the plants are healthy and doing well. If everything is dry and our signal goes through very easily, then probably the plants are starving of water. And if that combines all together well, we know when we have to irrigate. And below you see an irrigation system at work, and all the events here, we go to a low level at the bottom to a high level, that's the irrigation, and slowly over a few days, the plants are absorbing it. And if we did that, then apparently our apples are worth a lot more. This particular orchard got a 20-fold economic return on producing better apples because of the timing of the apples. So by putting a little bit of thought in where your water is and how you measure it and automating it, understanding the data, you can actually get to this elusive target at this point in time of 100% food productivity, because you have some measurements that you invest in a model, you invest in better management rules, and then you apply the whole thing. So that's basically, in a nutshell, what water systems can do if you manage them well. And the reason why you're doing it is because you don't want to have 2 billion people not having access to water. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let us think always when we listen those samples of presentations, let us be like critical. You remember from the morning session, that was very strong message that we should really sort of think about methods and ways and approaches, how to sell better our research to broader. This is in fact called outreach. So if you listen to that kind of sample, think about young person, put yourself in shoes of young person who doesn't know anything about engineering, doesn't know anything about, just only take some classes at school, science and mathematics and maybe possibly technology. And is it possible that those young people will find this as very interesting, as something that I can make a change? So in other words, whether those presentations are inspirational and are motivating. This is what our role, and think about that, because second part will be about engaging and interactive discussion. So you will be contributing and sharing what you do at your workplace. That was Sydney, that was Australia. Now we are flying to Seattle, and Linda is from University of Washington, from Seattle, and educated at Berkeley. So she will share what she does, and she's very heavily involved in education. Thank you.
Okay, that's good. Hello, my name is Linda Bushnell. I'm from the University of Washington in Seattle. And this is actually an example talk that most of it I've given at a couple times at STEM workshops that Bozenna was mentioning that we organized. She's organized, many years now, 17 years or so. But a couple times I've given this talk to STEM workshops with middle school and high school students, including the teachers. So I know that was mentioned before in the previous session, having the teachers involved with these sessions also. So this talk that I'm going to present, and I'll discuss more too, because there's a lot of layers to this talk. One is I can use this as an example talk in these STEM workshops. And it's also built upon a graduate class that I changed to introduce a laboratory. So I can give you a little background on that also. So what I'm mainly going to be talking about is this MinSeg balancing robot, which I'll take out afterwards. It's in a handy little box. And the reason why I chose this as a platform to use in a class I teach linear system theory class, a graduate level class, to professional master's students. And they come in once a week, 6 to 9 p.m. And it's after work, they're tired, they're hungry, and they're listening to a lot of theory with, theorems and proofs for linear systems theory. Well, it just didn't work the first time. It's like, okay, you have to change this. So I introduced a laboratory using MATLAB and Simulink with just models. That was much better, but it still didn't work. The feedback I got was they wanted hands-on work. So I researched different platforms that I could use, and this one, the MinSeg, seemed to be the best platform because the students come once a week and they needed something to take home with them, and this fits easily in a backpack. So it's a very interesting platform. So that class has been revamped by adding this hardware into it. So, and we also had an American Control Conference paper explaining that in more detail, how we introduced this platform into the class. It's also a nice platform to teach students in these STEM workshops or in any educational setting. If you wanted to do even a 1-week workshop at your university, I've worked with students, and it's based on the Arduino board. You can also buy it with Raspberry Pi. I've done up to like 3 to 5 day workshops with young students who are coming in as freshmen to the university, and meeting with them like 3 hours a day doing different projects with the Arduino. It's really fun. It's a great way to introduce the students to these concepts even before they come to the university. Okay, so this is my top. So what I'm gonna talk about is just to give you an idea on more about the platform and what this is, and then what we can do as control systems engineers with this type of platform. And I think when you listen to this, I'd like you to think about how you could use it in your classes, or like I said, in a STEM workshop. We'd love to have you come in and speak at these workshops that Bozenna organizes, or in any kind of educational workshop at your university. Okay, so this is what the robot looks like. I'll take it out later. So what we start with, so going back, I'll start with the model. We'll talk about the model of this because as control systems engineers, we have to start with a model because we want to use MATLAB or some other program and Simulink. And then we want to see what happens with, to introduce feedback, we start looking at what is an open loop response of this system. Of course, you can see it's an inverted pendulum, but now I don't want to use that term anymore because this morning Christos Chrysandas said, don't use inverted pendulums anymore. So this is a mini Segway, and that's why it's actually called MinSeg. So mini Segways, you talk about Segways, it is a big interest to a lot of people, especially young people. So it's like a little mini Segway, but you don't jump on it. And then we want to introduce how PID feedback control can be used to balance this Segway robot. And also a little bit off advanced topic from linear system theory would be LQR theory. And I've actually introduced that down into the linear system theory course that I teach, because in terms of this platform, you can do a lot of neat things if you use the LQR control. And then I'll also give a demonstration of the robots. We got it working again. I teach this course in the autumn quarter, but we got one of the robots working again. So in this case, looking at what is a model. So if you're introducing a model to younger students or in a STEM workshop, you start with you actually have the hardware, but we can't really do much with the hardware. If you just look at it, what do you know about the hardware? You actually have to come up with a model. So for this case, for this robot, there's actually a lot involved. The students have to go and do some measurements. They have to figure out where the moment of inertia is, and they have to measure it in grams. So a lot of them went to the grocery store to actually get on the scales in the deli department. And then they have to use Newton's law and come up with an actual model that they can then look at. So in this case, it takes a while. It takes a while to do this, and then we look at the model. So here's the model, and it's actually pretty complicated. Well, you basically use the Newton's law for the model, but below the mass acceleration equals force, we have these complicated matrices, and they're nonlinear, right? So we have these nonlinear cosines and sines and squares inside of here, and it's very difficult to do anything with this. So in terms of the model, we can then introduce the concept of linearity. So, and what do you mean by linearizing a system? Well, we want to basically, in this type of system, there are a lot of cosines and sines. We do a simple approximation for the cosine and sine for this. For an inverted pendulum or these segways, like I don't know if anyone has ridden a Segway. Has anyone ridden a Segway? Oh, good, so you probably can, yeah. This would be fun. If this were like if we had like a miniature size of this where like little kids could get on like an actual like medium-sized Segway, it'd be really fun to do that. So you use your body to go back and forth, but pretty much when you're on the Segway, it's straight up when you start, or when it's stable, right? It's straight up, and it's not going to move much in the degrees from where you're actually running at. Or the inverted pendulum, you're actually like plus or minus 3 degrees on either side of the zero if you want to think that. So you can actually linearize around the upright point, right? Because that's where you want to be in terms of the system. And then also around that point, you can show that it's linear. So the equations become much easier to work with. So this concept of linearization is actually quite difficult for if you're going to introduce this in a STEM workshop with middle school students, which you can actually draw pictures and show like these ripples of the waves going out to lines. So once we have a linear model for this, then it's very easy to work with in terms of the state space. Again, here you'd have to introduce the concept of what is a state. So in this case, the state for this robot as a model, we're going to look at simple things like the position, and then which is the x. So in this case, the robot has wheels. So you put it on the ground and you start at x equals 0, and then x will go forward, being the position. You have the velocity, which is x dot in the picture here. And then the alpha, or a, sometimes it comes out as, is the angle that it's deviating from upright. So you want to start at alpha equals 0, and that's actually quite difficult to do with the real robot, because some people, you put it up against the wall or a book to try to get it that way. And then also then the velocity of the alpha dot. So these are the 4 states of the system that we would then, in the linearization, come up with our state space model. So that would be down here. We have the ABCD matrices. So we want to look at this in terms of, since it's a Segway robot or inverted pendulum, it has a lot to do with stability. So you're controlling it to be upright, but you also have to look at it as being a stable system. So if you want to introduce the concept of stability, you can show that the stable system is a system that has minimum energy, or unstable is, there's actually, I think there's there might be a little, oh, what did it do? Okay. Oh, here. So like this one would be, you can have little videos showing unstable systems would bounce a ball and make it go to a different state for that. Okay, so in looking at that model, so now we take the linearized model for the system, and we start looking at what are the different responses for the system. So this would be, first one is the open loop response. So if you just took the robot and you turned it on, well, what's going to happen? It's just going to fall over. So you can actually do that with the robot, and you can actually do it in simulation. So this is actually the simulation of the actual, we did continuous and discrete time versions of this, and then also the red line is the actual robot falling over, which is what is expected. Then we want to look at introducing the concept of feedback. So here we're going to look at proportional, PI, proportional integral, and proportional derivative, and then PID altogether you can look at to get this robot to balance. So first you introduce the proportional controller. Just the proportional controller is going to be on, well, which state? You have to pick a state, right? So in this case, the upright Segway robot is going to be, you want to make sure the angle is at 0 upright. So we pick that state, which is the alpha state up here, and we feed it back through just a proportional controller. And it's going back to the motor, voltage going to the motor, right? Because this is balancing on wheels, It has a simple motor. It's going to go back and forth on the motor, and that's what you're controlling. In this case, we did with a proportional controller. In the theory, when you actually compute it with the model, you have a huge amount of voltage, 67 volts going into this, which actually for this little robot is not going to be very practical, but it can be done with the model, right? So you have the model, and then you have the real robot, and so you can have two different things. So this was the video of just the proportional controller, and you can see you start it upright, and then it soon falls over. So it balances for just a tiny, maybe not even a second. It's going to, in this case, is a short video. It stands up, you let it go, and it pretty much falls over. So you can see in the plots, the same thing in the plots here with the real robot is the red, and what you have from the model, you can predict what it has. You can show that. So then here you say, well, that looks pretty good. Why don't we just increase the proportional controller, just keep increasing and increasing it till it works, right? Because then you think it would work. But what happens in this case is that you would never get to a stable system. So, and you would also get some huge velocities which just wouldn't work out. So proportional control alone does not work out. So you have to add the integral part. So here the integral part is we take the same angle and we feed that back through an integrator, and we give it a gain on the integral term, and we have the proportional term, and then you can see that we come up with gains, but the gains are actually quite huge. So this is actually doesn't work, and you actually, in this case, you can see it burns out part of the Arduino if you're actually trying to get something that's huge, here like 170 volts going into your little Arduino. So if we do the PID controller, these gains that were used, it's kind of hard to see, but this was 68, and here we had, in terms of the integral, was 300, but this one worked a little bit better. It stays upright a little bit longer, but you can see it falls over, right? So this is, it's kind of like you're building up and up and up. So then we say, okay, well, we've only looked at this angle up top, right? So what do we do about the wheels? We also have states, the wheel states, the x dot here. So we could use those also in our feedback controller. And then if we would do this, we could put a gain on the gain on the wheel into the PID controller. So if we do that, we could find a little bit better response for the system. In this case, it would be we have the PID working. You can see the gains are in that little red box up here, which seem to work pretty well. And in this case, the robot's pretty stable if you're looking at this one. Then the last part you can do is this LQR control, is where you look at all of these states together in one shot, right? So you do the LQR control. And this concept, you would have to be introduced in the course or in the workshop if you're doing this. And then here in this video, we had the student put a little brace on it so that he didn't have to keep holding it when he started it, so it started pretty much upright. And you can see it's jittering a little bit. From the model, the plots from the model, you see what the states are actually doing, and then you can see it on the real robot. And then this one was a recent video we just did with the LQR controller, and I had one of my students take it out of the box and try to get it working again, because they sit in the box until the fall time. And I think it was mentioned in another, I think John Tilbury was mentioning in the earlier session how the students got together the night before and actually did it, and then the next morning they helped the other groups work on the projects, including getting the software to connect up. And this is the hardest thing, was getting the software to connect up to these robots. We use MATLAB and getting all the drivers together. Anyway, the student I had do this, he came to me and said, oh, it's, it only stays upright for like 35 seconds or 40 seconds. I can't get it to stay up any longer. And I said, oh my goodness, that's like the best I've heard, because it's hard to have these things keep going, right? Because they're very, very small. Anyway, so this is basically it's a nice platform to look at in terms of coming up with a model and also the hardware. So I wanted to show you just it comes in a little box, and I actually partially put it together, but it actually has, all the pieces are in a box, and you put it together in terms of has a mega board, Arduino mega board with a shield on it, which has an accelerometer on it, and it has all the parts. And then you have these like Lego NXT pieces. This has just one motor. You can actually run it with 2 motors. This is called MinSeg.com, and you can go to their website. They have a lot of software, and they have a lot of sample laboratories that I actually use. There's about 6 or 8 laboratories. You can use short laboratories, or you can assign the students to do at home. It's at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute is where they're actually made. It's kind of a laboratory, what they call MinSeg laboratory. So in this case, I have it with batteries. You can actually run it tethered, so you don't have the batteries, but then you have to go change all your parameters in the model. So I'll show you over here. It's actually maybe one of these. So if you start it, it's hopefully it'll work. So you want to start it upright, and then you have to kind of tap it if it's going to go, or it's going to go off the table. Okay. Oh, it's going to tap it really on the edge of the table. So it's actually a very cool mini segue for students of all ages to use. And like I said, I use it in a graduate class, and they just love it because they can take it home and work on it, and they show their kids if they have families. Or we've used it for middle school and high school students also. So it actually stays up pretty nicely. So afterwards, I can show this to people if we, afterwards for more of a demo. Okay, yeah, that's good. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Later on, you can discuss, or you can ask questions. And now, next, a quick presentation by Sebastian Trimpe. He came from Germany and educated in Switzerland. How I got Sebastian involved in those workshops? Simply his advisor, Raffaello Andrea, you probably know him, because he produced a lot of YouTubes. And he was my permanent presenter when he was in the United States, and then he left for Switzerland. So then when he was there, I asked for his students. So this is how Sebastian became very engaged and involved in those workshops for high school students.
Okay, great. So I'm Sebastian. Thanks a lot, Bozenna, for the very kind introduction. So what I'm going to present is another example of an outreach talk that I've given to general audiences, for instance, to high school students and teachers, but also an open house days at our institute. And the aim of this talk is essentially to introduce the concepts of feedback and machine learning, and to raise some of the questions that we deal with in our research. So given that you are my audience now, I'm going to pretend that you know nothing about control, so please forgive me about that. And during the talk, also ask you to do a few things, just as I usually ask my audience to do some things, but don't worry, it's going to be very, very easy. Okay, so in this talk, I'm going to talk about intelligent machines. So at our institute, we are thinking about how can we make systems, machines intelligent or smart. And these are 2 examples of machines that we're working with. So these are humanoid robots. You see our robot Hermes and robot Apollo. Humanoid robot means they are sort of built to roughly resemble a human. And we are thinking about the fundamentals that it takes to make these systems intelligent. So what do we mean by intelligence? So there's certainly different definitions for this, but what we mean for the purpose of our research is that we would like these systems to be able to do something useful autonomously. Autonomously means without any human intervention or supervision. So doing something useful, what could this be? We would love to have robots, for instance, that we could send in an emergency response team. For instance, this burning building, we would love to be able to send in robots that would by themselves look for injured people, rescue people, or look for dangerous situations in there, so that we don't have to send people who would be in danger. But we don't need to just think about catastrophes and emergency situations, but we can think about daily life. Wouldn't it be great to have a robot that we could just send and tell, look, go ahead and clean up this room? That would be fantastic, I think. However, if we ask our robots, hey, can you clean up this room? They're going to say, I don't know how to do this. I have no idea. So robots can't clean up a room, but there is examples of robots that do very sophisticated things. So for instance, these robots here, these orange arms, they are automatically manufacturing a car. So you see these arms here as they're putting some welding dots at very precisely defined positions. And in this video, you don't see any humans. So these robots are doing these tasks by themselves. So here's a welding robot, and then there's other robots who move around parts, and all of this without humans. So this raises the question, why is building cars seemingly easy for a robot, but cleaning up a room difficult? And this is, of course, very counterintuitive, because we all can clean up a room, but to build a car, that's rather difficult for us. So in this talk, I want to get at this point, like, why can a robot build a car, but robots today cannot clean up a room? So this is what we want to discuss, what I want to convey in this talk. And to do this, I'm going to address a couple of questions. We start with the question, how can a robot just do basic tasks, first of all, things like standing and balancing, for instance. And we're then going to look again at the question of why is it so challenging to clean up a room, and why is this more difficult than building a car for a robot? And in the end, we talk about, is it possible that a robot can learn, and then is this maybe the way for the robot to eventually also clean up all of our rooms? Okay, so we start with the first question. I want to explain to you how is it possible that a robot can do basic tasks, and we look at the task of standing and balancing, because obviously that's the first thing the robot needs to do, because otherwise, well, it can't do more sophisticated things. Now, before we look at how the robot does it, I'm going to do an experiment that will now involve all of you. So this is working? Okay, perfect. So you all need to get active now. What I would like you to do is, everybody please stand up. You can remain at your seats, but please everybody stand up. Also, please, people in the back rows, put your laptop aside for a second. Don't worry, it's not going to be too difficult. Great, so everybody stand up. Make sure you have a little bit of room to your neighbor. And what I would like you to do now is to stand on one leg and then try to close your eyes and see if you can balance like this. Balance on one leg with eyes closed. Okay, this is excellent. I hope someone took a photo. This looks great, perfect. Thank you very much. So you can sit down again. This worked very well. Okay, perfect. So as I could see, all of you were able to balance even with eyes closed. So we can do it. How about the robot? So here are some videos from our lab, and you see this is some work by my colleagues, and you see my colleague Alexander here, and one of his favorite tasks is like poking the robot and seeing how well it can balance. And he implemented these balancing algorithms, and he's now testing, like, can this robot also balance even if it's disturbed. What you see here is the lower half of one of these robots that I showed earlier, of the robot Hermes, that is programmed to balance very, very robustly. Okay, so we saw that the robot can balance the same way as we balance, so we now want to understand how does this balancing work. And when we were balancing, when you were standing on your leg, you were essentially doing three things. You are sensing, you have particular organs in your inner ear that give you a sense of balance. This means, like, how are you oriented versus gravity, and how fast are you moving. Your nervous system and brain uses this information to then decide about how you should act or how you should move. So I saw with most people here in the audience, just as for me, like when I do this, I kind of slowly move around my arms to keep balance. And these three things, sensing, deciding, and moving, is also what the robot does to keep balance. So we're now going to look at all of these aspects in detail to see how the robot does it. And we start with moving. There's different ways how a robot can move, and one typical way is hydraulics. So this hydraulic actuation works like follows. We have a piston here, and then there's a chamber here and another chamber here, and if we put in some high pressure fluid, typically oil in here, and some low pressure here, then this piston will move. So the robot is gonna move. And this is you all know this from excavators, for instance, where we see such a piston here, that when this moves out, then this arm is moving, or also the shovel is moving. And the same type of actuation also the robot has. So if you watch closely, then you see the same types of pistons also here on the robot. So this is how this robot Hermes can move. There's other type of actuation, also electric actuation, so electric motors that our other robot, Apollo, uses to move around its arms. So the robot can move either hydraulically or electrically, but that's not enough. The robot also needs to know where it is. And for this, it uses sensors. So two particular types of sensors that it has are accelerometers that measure acceleration, which is the change of velocity, and rotation sensors that measure like how fast is it rotating. And these sensors are actually very similar to those sensors that we also have in our inner ears that give us a sense of balance, and we use these sensors on the robot to basically tell the robot so that the robot has a sense of balance as well, like how is it oriented versus gravity, is it falling or not. Now these sensors by themselves are, however, not enough because the robot also needs to know where its arms and legs are. Now, before I tell you how the robot does this, we do another experiment. However, this time it's going to be even simpler. You can all remain seated. What I would like you to do now is I would like you to close your eyes once again and then take your right or left arm and see if with your finger you can hit your nose while you keep your eyes closed. Very good. So, great. So I think you could all do this. This is fantastic. So this means that we know kind of where our arms and legs are, even without looking at them. So we have a feeling for this, and this is called proprioceptive sensing. And it's easy for us, but however, a newborn child, like a baby, typically does not have the sense yet. So this is something that we developed over the years. Now, similarly, the robot has also sensors that tell it basically where its arms are. Here, for instance, these are angle sensors that measure deflection of the parts of its arm. Okay, so now we have all the sensing information. What are we going to do with it? We use this sensor information and feed it to a computer. So this computer here, which is on the robot, and this computer then computes commands that are being sent to the motor, which the motor then executes. And this principle of inputs, computer, and outputs is also, of course, a very common principle for ordinary computers, where the input could be just a keyboard or a mouse. We have some desktop computer, and the output would be on a screen. And just as for the ordinary computer, what the output here is depends both on the input, but also on the software that is running on the computer. This is also the case for the balancing robot. So whether the robot is doing the right thing, is doing the right computations here, depends critically on the algorithm, on the software that is implemented on this computer. And this algorithm we also call the controller, and this is what all of this community revolves around, like how do we design good controllers to achieve the things that we want to achieve. Okay, let's take it all together now. So we have the sensors that sense where the robot is, what it's doing, that this information is fed to the computer, which computes commands which are then executed by the motor. Through this, the robot is going to move, which is again sensed, and so on and so forth. So what we have here is a closed loop. And this is what we call the feedback loop. And this is a fundamental principle for autonomous systems, because it allows the system to observe what it's doing and then take corrective action if necessary. And these feedback loops are running all the time. So on our robots, for instance, we compute new commands with 1,000 times every second. So feedback is running continuously all the time. Okay, in our community, we typically like to draw things a little bit more abstract, so we often use these block diagrams here, where we have a system here, which would represent our robot. We have some sensors. This is the computer or the algorithm that's running on there, the controller, and some actuators here, which would be the motors. And the controller, of course, also needs to know what we want to achieve. And controllers are also used everywhere in basically all technical systems, and also in these robots that do the car manufacturing. So for instance, this welding robot here, where we want to place a welding dot at an exact position, is using feedback, because it's always observing like where is the end effector and making sure that it will put the welding dot at the exact right position. We can do serious things like building cars, but there's also some fun things we can do with feedback. So for instance, we can balance some objects. So here I'm trying to balance like a paper cube, and it's not working, as you all know now, because this cube is passive and doesn't have feedback. So here's a bigger version of that cube. It's roughly the same shape, it's just bigger and it's made out of aluminum, but that's not the key difference here. The key difference is that this cube has control. It has sensors, has actuators, and has computers, and because of this, this system can balance by itself, can balance autonomously on any of its corners. And this is a system that we built in our research lab to do to study questions about coordination, because here actually each of these arms has an independent controller, and we've been looking at questions of how can we optimally coordinate them, what are information that we need to exchange, etc. Okay, so these were some examples about feedback control, what we can do with feedback control, and feedback control is a core principle to build autonomous machines, because it is this principle of sensing, checking what we are doing, making a decision based on this, and then correcting our actions if needed. So question is this all? Are we good to go now, and can our robot now clean up the room? Well, our robot, of course, has many feedback loops, and feedback is a concept that has been known for many, many years, and our robots have many of these feedback controllers, but still sort of if we tell it, can you clean up this room, it's not going to do it, because currently we do not understand how we can program, how we can build a system that would solve a task like this. So why is this? Why can a robot build a car but not clean up a room? So there's a couple of important differences. For the industry robot, this robot has a very precisely defined task. For instance, this robot here has to set a welding dot at a precisely defined position. While here, the task is very fuzzy, very non-defined, because we just say clean up the room. But we don't really know, does cleaning up the room mean, okay, now take these parts, put them in the box, and then put the box away, or does the box need to go out of the room? We don't really know this. This is a very fuzzy task that involves many, many subtasks. Moreover, the industry robot operates in an exactly known environment, because the components that it works on are exactly the same over and over again. While the kids' room, of course, is a changing environment. It can look very different today from tomorrow, or even 5 minutes can make a huge difference. So finally, the industry robot is executing a repetitive task, while in this situation, we need continuous adaptation to new situations. The robot needs to decide by itself kind of what to do. This situation is a typical situation where we can do classical feedback, while here the problem starts with we don't really know what the goal is, we don't really know what the system is, the room is changing all the time, and therefore we don't know how to control this. And one angle how we try to address this in our research is we're trying to incorporate learning. We are investigating how can we use learning from data, machine learning, to make the systems capable of doing more things. So what I'm going to do in the remaining time of this talk is just give you a brief example from our current research of how we try to give learning capabilities to our robots. So we're going to look at a relatively simple example, an example where we basically want to balance a stick. So imagine you have a stick and you want to balance this on your hand, and this is what we want the robot to do. However, we're not going to tell it like how long the stick is, so the robot is not going to know like what the system is, and we don't know the controller. In this case, we do know that we want to balance. Now, the approach that we're taking here is that we use the sensor information not only for feedback, but also to check how well we are doing, and then use this information to update our controller to learn essentially the controller. So here's a video about of our robot Apollo, where we demonstrate how this learning can work. What you see here, first of all, is as the robot is balancing like a stick of short length, and it's doing this fairly well, because this is the outcome of a previous learning experiment. But what we're going to do now is we're going to replace the short stick with the long one, but we're not updating the controller yet. So the robot is just trying out the previous controller, and as you can see here, it is kind of increasing in amplitude, and then it fails. It can't balance the stick because the dynamics, the system have changed. Now we're running a learning method that we have developed in our research, which essentially tries out in a systematic way different controllers. And then each controller evaluates how well it is doing by assigning a cost. That means here, a dot that we see here that is high means it's poor performance, there's a large cost. And what we're doing is we're exploring this region here, trying out different controllers in order to find the controller that is the lowest. So you see the robot here as it's sort of trying out controllers, and what is important here is it's not just randomly trying, but it's using the previous information to then decide what is a good area to do more experiments in, what is a promising region. And in the end, we see the learned controller actually moves very little, so you almost don't see it moving at all, so we have achieved our objective. Okay, so the bottom line is that we believe that to build intelligent and autonomous machines, we need feedback control and we need learning from data. And this is the research that we do in our institute, combining the two in good ways. And this research is at the intersection of mathematics, engineering, and computer science, because you need to integrate all of these to address those problems. Okay, before stopping my talk, I just want to now mention two other outreach activities that have worked well for us in the past. So this is sort of talks that we have been giving to essentially explain to the general public like what we're doing at our institute and our research, and these have typically worked pretty well. Other things that we've done are we have engaged in writing popular science articles about our research. So these are in German because my institute is in Germany, so we kind of have to speak the language of those people who want to talk to. But maybe more important, whether the article is in German or English, is that you of course also have to speak the language of the reader. And that's sometimes like a fine line. You of course need to simplify, but you also don't want to oversimplify things that you do. And another thing that works extremely well are public exhibitions. So we sometimes take our systems, our robots, and go out to the public and show them to the general public. And that's great because this immediately engages people. They start asking questions like, what is the system, what is it doing? And then that in a very natural way, you get to talk about what you're doing. Okay, so I'll stop here. Thank you very much for listening, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Before we will open for discussion, and also you will share your experience and best practices, we will have the last presentation. This is by Anthony Rossiter. He comes from United Kingdom, and he has been involved in Ifac, a technical committee on control education for many, many years. And he will be soon leading that committee. So if you would be interested in joining and doing that, and I wanted to say that I am on technical board of Ifac, in charge of education, trying to connect all technical committees in technical board in Ifac. So all your feedback, all your input will be extremely valuable. But Anthony, to my understanding, Anthony will be talking about effective ways of communicating that stuff that we are doing with broad spectrum of audience.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to be a little bit provocative. Please don't take it personally. It's not based on you individually, it's based upon broad-based observation. So I'm going to look at effective presentations, and you'll see why as we go on. So what am I going to give you? Some core principles, bad examples and good examples, and a summary, and you'll see as we go what I mean. So core principles, the first thing you have to ask is, who is the audience? And I'm saying that because I'm surprised at how many times people don't think who is the audience before they plan their presentation. What background have the audience got? What language can they cope with? And you can see at the bottom, motivation. What motivation have they got? So I've got some examples. Is that your typical audience? And you probably all recognize that, don't you? Even at this conference. But, you know, it's a key point. Is that your audience? Okay. How do you engage with people like that? Or is that your audience? You could have a different audience, and you have to think very carefully, who are you talking to before you write your presentation, your demonstrations and everything. Okay, so a key thing that I will say is often less is more. And I think a big mistake that people make is they try to do too much. Far better to do little than to do a lot if the little is understood. So you might be doing a brilliant presentation, but for the wrong audience, in which case it's actually not brilliant anymore. Okay, so an example. So this is just some background on my department. I come from Department of Automatic Control and Systems Engineering. You can see some of our buildings here. We've got £8.5 million of facilities completed in 2009, a very diverse curriculum. And by the way, this is what's going to happen. You're going to be saying, so what? And you're switching off. Why do you care? If you're a 12-year-old or a 14-year-old, why do you care? You don't want to know. So why is the slide there? Or if the slide is there, why is it taking more than 5 seconds? It might, in some countries, that might work. I can tell you in the UK, you do that slide, everybody's switched off, you've lost them before you started. Okay? Right. So this, again, is my department. So the Diamond, that's our brand new building. It's got specialist teaching facilities, a range of lecture theatres, seminar rooms, open plan learning spaces, library. I could go on and on. I'm not going to dwell on this slide. Hopefully, you can immediately see this slide is full of very useful and interesting information. But there's several problems with it. One, the font is far too small. Much too small. Far too much text on that for anybody in a reasonable audience to engage with. It's also dull. Dull as ditch water, as we say in the UK. Nobody's interested. Even if you're trying to sell your department to prospective students, you have to be very, very careful that you don't overdo it. Okay? So from my perspective, the font's far too small and there's far too much text on that slide. It's not going to work. Okay? Right. So a different example. So this sort of thing we would do at school is say, well, what is engineering? So this first sentence, fairly bland, application of scientific theory, sound practice, common sense, solution of real-world problems. Yeah, you can sell that. You can talk for 20 seconds. But actually the second sentence is the one that we focus on. So where you say, where science is about discovery, and students can understand that, discovering new stars, discovering protons and neutrons, engineering is about invention. And that's what we tend to do in our department. We try to focus on getting students to see engineering is about being an inventor of the future world. So I'll put a few pictures here that you could easily stop and talk to the people that you're with. I don't need to explain them to you. If anybody doesn't know the one in the bottom right, that's the bloodhound, which is something they're trying to build to break the land speed record. But it may not be well known across the world, but in the UK it's quite a big project. Okay, but anyway, you can see, hopefully, these are things you can talk to school children about, and they can see the advantages. They can see that it's about invention. So, what about control? You want to say what you do as a department. So, here's a picture, and everybody can see what's in the picture. It's a premature baby, obviously not particularly well. What do you want to do for this baby? Well, babies aren't very good at controlling their own temperature and controlling lots of things, so you have to do it for them. You need to put them in an environment, and I should get Alberto to talk because he knows this far better than I do. But you've got to control things for them, control the temperature, control the humidity, and so on. And put like this, people know exactly what control is. Yeah, okay, you're making sure the temperature's right, you're making sure the humidity's right, you've got some means of doing that. That is what control is. Okay? So you've got a message which they can cope with. A message that they can engage with. You're not making it too complicated. Okay? Now, anybody see what's wrong with this slide? Hopefully it's pretty obvious. Actually, anybody who knows me, I can't take photographs. Even with modern phones, my photographs are always like the one on the left. I don't know what it is. I have a permanent shake, and that's probably why that I always shake. All my photos become fuzzy even with new cameras, so who knows why. But you can see what the problem is. The one on the right is reasonably well focused. The one on the left is not focused, all right? So, an example of control. Autofocus on a mobile phone camera. It doesn't work very well for me, but I'm sure it works pretty well for somebody else. It's been done for you. The control, the focusing is done for you. Now, the younger generation might not be particularly familiar with cameras like that, but I guess the older generation will all remember when you had to do it by hand, and again, it was nearly always unfocused when I did it, but there we go. Different example. So, what is control? So it's the automation of decision making that could be carried out by a human, but we get bored or we're unreliable or etc., etc. Now, what I would do here, if you have a younger audience, is I would stop. You know, I'm not very good at walking out to the front. I'd walk out to the front and I'd say, okay, let's have a discussion. Because the other thing, you probably all know, what's the classic thing about lectures? Don't talk to the students for more than about 10 or 15 minutes without getting them to do something active. If you keep talking, what happens? Concentration starts okay. After 10, 15 minutes, it very quickly goes off. They stop concentrating. So you've got to have an activity. You've got to have something in the middle. So what you do here, you'd have an activity. Get them all shouting out. What examples can you think of? Okay. So you could finish with some obvious examples. We don't need to worry about the chemical factory, but they probably all understand central heating, especially if they live in a colder climate. They might understand cruise control, but not in the UK because our roads are so busy you couldn't have it on for more than 5 seconds, so it'd be a bit pointless. Okay, but you see the key thing here is get the audience involved, keeps them alert, and anyone who knows about learning is if the people are active, they remember, they engage. If they're passive, they don't. Okay, I'm not going to dwell on this slide because now what I was going to do is talk about my research area, all right? But I'm not going to dwell on this slide. I'm going to go straight to the message because you'll all fall asleep, all right? The key thing is this slide would not be too bad at a conference like this where everybody understands what a state-space model is. They probably just understand what degrees of freedom and inequalities and things are. But if you weren't a researcher in control, you've had it, okay? You're totally lost. And there's just a warning there. Think very carefully about what mathematical detail you include in your slides. Think about whether the audience can follow it, okay? I'm not making any judgment on your individual slides, but just ask the question, okay? So this is what I would do. So concepts of horizons. So you can see here I've got a maze, which I've stolen off the internet. Now, anybody here who's ever tried to get through a maze, what's the biggest problem? The biggest problem is you can only see the next corner, can't you? You don't actually have a map of the maze. So if you could only look 3 meters ahead, can you get to the center of the maze? Well, you might eventually, by trial and error and by walking around for hours, but the key point is you can't see far enough ahead, can you? So it's an obvious problem. So what goes wrong? You can't see far enough ahead, you can't see the whole map, all right? Different example. I'm not a chess player, but anyone who is a chess player, are you ever going to be any good just looking 3 moves ahead? Clearly not, yeah? Good chess players look a lot more than 3 moves ahead, as well as memorizing hundreds of games, all right? So what's the point here? That you can get across to people in a very, very easy manner this concept of what's a horizon. So horizon, how far ahead do you need to look to plan effectively? And clearly, if you don't look very far ahead, your plans are not going to work, all right? Now, why have I put that there? Because in my area, which is predictive control, this is something that sometimes people miss. Good research often begins from common sense. First of all, make sure you've got the common sense right before you dive into the mathematics, okay? Because if you dive into the maths and actually it doesn't make sense, you're not going to get a good solution, all right? So what's horizons? Degrees of freedom. This is another concept in predictive control. Has anyone ever tried to drive a car when you're only allowed to stay in one gear? If you're in first, it's a disaster. I suppose a lot of you have, I forget the word because we don't really have them in the UK. Automatic, that's it. You have automatic, so you don't have to think about it. But in the UK, most cars are still manual. You have to change gear by hand. If your car stays in first gear, you've got big problems. Once you get to 15 miles an hour, the engine's screaming. You're not going to get anywhere. So you can see there's a clear problem, and people will understand that, okay? The concept of if you're stuck in one gear, you haven't got the right flexibility to drive your car effectively, all right? So here's a different example. Hopefully the sign speaks for itself. It means you've got a windy road, lots of bends. But if you were planning to drive around that windy road, would you plan a sequence of steering actions where you're moving the steering wheel now when the bends are 50 yards down the road? Well, you say, clearly not. I'm going to turn the steering wheel when I get to the bends. Make sense? All right? But you would be surprised to hear that in predictive control, this is a concept that sometimes people just don't realize. They put all the degrees of freedom now, even when the planned moves are in the future. And they have this mismatch. And again, it's an example that you can talk about concepts of degrees of freedom very, very simply without having to involve lots of mathematics. Okay? So you can forget the bottom bit, but research in my department, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, I won't bore you with it. Now, different slide. So this is a slide that's, the rest of the slides I've stolen from my department. My department gives lots of outreach talks. And these are some of the sort of slides that my colleagues use. Now, I'm not going to dwell on this slide because it's telling you, all right, our vision for the future, smart planet, autonomous cars, smart cities, etc., etc. But what's wrong with this? To my mind, okay, if you're going to spend 5 seconds on it, this slide is fine. But don't spend more than 5 seconds because it's too busy. It's got 3 different examples. They're all too small. You can't really see what's going on. Okay? So fine as an introductory slide, 5 seconds, then move on. So here you can see I've put one of the pictures on a single slide. And you could start to talk about this. All right? You can see renewable energy in 2 places, electric bus. But actually, this is my viewpoint, I don't like this particular picture because I bet you most of you out there can't read any of the detail, even though I've blown it up to a full side. You probably can't read any of the words unless you've got brilliant eyesight. I can only just read them on the screen. Okay? You probably can't see any of the detail. So actually, I think it's not a good example. And again, I would say that's something to think about. Are the pictures you're using appropriate? So here's a different example. From one of my colleagues, we've got some experts in space systems in my department, and these are some pictures of my colleague. And he focuses on space weather. Now, space weather, he's looking particularly at the solar wind, and you'll get solar flares. Now, I'm not going to dwell on this too much because hopefully you can see immediately, without me actually going into the detail, what's wrong with this slide. So I'll put it down. There's potentially a really interesting message here that will really excite 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds, 15-year-olds, really excite them. But this slide is much too busy. Pictures are too small. Text is too small. Too much text. So you're looking to say, where do I look? What do I read? Where's the message? And you're lost. So it's not a well-designed slide. So I've got a wonderful message. I failed to communicate it. Okay? So if you want to find out more about space systems engineering in my department, you can come and speak to me. I can tell you a bit and then refer you to Misha. Okay? This is a better example. So anybody who knows Peter Fleming, I'm sure a lot of people here will know Peter Fleming. This is sort of slides from Peter. Okay? So research in my department looks at basically aircraft engines. And we've probably all been on planes to get here, and you might ask yourself, how reliable are planes in general? And what happens if one of your big engines fails halfway across the Atlantic? Right? A question you might want to know about. So hopefully that's clear. That's what happens. Okay? A bit of humour just to keep people awake. All right? So, I wouldn't dwell on this slide too much. Again, this is a slide that Peter's group has designed. But the key thing is to talk about what can be done. So what people are looking at these days is collecting data continuously from the engines, sending the data to a central depot somewhere that then says, right, this plane is scheduled to be in Hong Kong in 3 days. It looks like there's a fault that's beginning to develop. In 3 days, let's pull it in, let's fix the fault. Okay? And that's the sort of work that's going on. Children might not relate to this. Does anyone understand MOT? Annual car maintenance service? It depends in different countries, but I won't dwell on it. So I can skip that one. In fact, I can probably skip all of the rest of these because you get the message. I mean, I think that sort of slide has about enough text and enough of a picture for a simple audience. If you put more, I think the audience is lost. Okay? Choose one message on each slide and focus on that message. Don't try and put 3. Okay? So I won't do the rest of the slides. You can see there's lots of different examples from all my colleagues, and these are the sorts of slides that our department uses when it goes out to schools. This is quite a nice one, but again, this one's from Maddie, if anyone knows Professor Mafoof. But again, he's used basically intelligent control, fuzzy systems and things in operating theatres. So just a final slide to finish. I can't do the MATLAB GUIs because I've got a funny one I use in lectures, but we're using this computer, so I can't show you that one. But this is something that I do. Does anyone know what a pogo stick is? I don't know whether they have them around the world or whether it's a UK. Okay. I've got a pogo stick, and it's one of the things that I take into lectures early in year 1, mainly because it makes students laugh. And if you make students laugh, they tend to remember. They remember some of the message because there's an association. Okay, so it's a very simple example, but I take that into lectures. I also, I don't know if anybody's got these, Mr. Universe springs, but I take this into a different lecture. So one of the lectures I had to use to do historically was modelling springs in series, springs in parallel. How does the spring constant change? And so the sort of thing I would do is get a very small and slight female and give her 3 springs, and get a 6'5" bodybuilder bloke, give them the 2 springs, and see who could extend them the furthest. And of course, you know who's going to win, don't you? So, and again, it's just a very, very simple message to get the students to rub in. Yeah, springs in series are really easy. Springs in parallel aren't. So, that's enough. I'm not going to do all the slides. You can see the key point. Think about the audience, okay? And think about how much detail the audience are really going to benefit from. Because I would say it's far better you give them a few bits and they go away wanting more than give them a lot and they go away asleep, confused, and having observed nothing. I think that's enough. I hope I didn't take too long.
Less is better than more. As Anthony always likes, as long as I know him, he likes to provocate. So dishes you have to take like that because everyone is individual. And I personally, I promote and give room for everyone. So you can be creative, and this is your way, and this is that way, but panelists are now here, and the floor is for you. So Anthony wanted to provoke you a little bit, but we don't need to focus on just presentation, how to do it, but we can do what I really would like as output of this session is really because eventually I will be collecting what I call like plain talks. In other words, this good talk that maybe satisfies some of Anthony's conditions, but plain talk for example, for high school students who have no clue what is engineering about, except that they heard from parents or friends, and they would like to know more about systems and control. And I will be collecting that. I will be asking through technical committees and through so-called liaisons to education. So I will be building sort of like library. I believe that is very good to have that. So now I open for you, whether you can share your observations, whether you have questions to panelists, whether you have some best practice, but based on my experience from morning session, I will limit your presentation to 2 minutes, if it's okay with you. So maybe everyone would like to, and this is the best class is when every student contributes to the class, to learning and teaching. So, great, thank you.
What I got from Anthony is that passing information is difficult. And sometimes I'm surprised. If you pass it to students who come to learn, might be easier than passing it to your colleagues who already know. And you come with something different, it could be very tough to pass it. And you talk about common sense. We are having a Kalman stuff, and I think one thing he said, mathematics is very, very important once you understand the physics. But sometimes we forget. As an engineer, I have a lot of experience. I was shocked to see that the common sense was not enough. I need mathematics. On the other hand, some people think that mathematics is enough. And I have some new stuff. I said today, also, you can see journals, full journals, IEEE, on the famous filter of famous Professor Kalman. But don't look for his seminal papers when he was not famous. Look it in Boletina Técnica Mexicana or Journal of Basics or something. And I think, I don't know, I don't have anything clear to say, just that passing information is difficult, and the newer and the more different your information is, maybe more difficult to pass to your high-level colleagues than to the students who come to learn things.
I think, if I understood correctly, he said that communicating with our peers and our colleagues is sometimes more difficult than communicating with students. I accept that's probably true. I'm not quite sure what else I can add.
Would you like to comment?
If I may add to that, if you have a common language, it's easier to communicate than when you don't have a common language. But in engineering, mathematics and physics and so on are normal part of our language. But that's the easy part, in my opinion, because you're talking to the converted choir. But the real issue is that half your audience, at best, maybe 90% of your audience, actually doesn't share that common language with you. So you have to bring them, and you have to go part of the way. Like we talk, good example, medical doctors, highly learned people, well established in their field. They're not going to learn mathematics because you speak mathematics. So you will have to go part of the way to make a communication a two-way street. Otherwise, you have no communication. So if we want to get our message out, I think it behooves us to also go towards the audience, just like we were heard here, and actually express our message in terms that may not be totally precise, may not totally satisfy ourselves, but at least gets a connection and a reaction. Because without the connection and the reaction, nothing happens.
Hi, I am Iman Izadi from Isfahan University of Technology in Iran. There was actually a question in the morning. I'd like to comment on that, and then I get to this. Somebody asked what happens if software can design controller. Does it threaten us? And we already have this. Actually, this has been around for at least 15 years. We call it a PID controller with auto-tuning. It's a software that tunes the controller. And we still have jobs. So I don't think that in anyhow is going to be a problem for us. I'm going to share an experience I have. This is a 1-hour session. Our university holds this program for last year high school students and first year electrical engineering students. And everybody goes and talks about their discipline, communication, power systems. I talk about control systems about 45 minutes. And in my experience, the best example that I can present is human body. So we have about 200 control loops in our bodies, known control loops in our bodies. And I talk about 3 little experiments that everybody can do in the class. One of them is related to what Sebastian did. The first one is the reading when something moves. I don't know if you're familiar with that experiment or not. So if you hold some piece of paper in front of you, you move the paper, you can't read. But if you keep the paper still and move your head, you can read. And then I asked why. What's the difference? Because motion is relative. Like what, it shouldn't make any difference, but it does. And the answer is that we have feedback in the second case, and we don't have it in the first case. For the second experiment, I bring a mannequin with me to the class, and I ask some student with the same, complexion, same height, and stand them together, and ask someone else to push these two. So if you push the mannequin, it will fall down immediately. The human doesn't, and it's very robust. Look, the balance is very robust. And then, again, the question is why? And that has feedback control, the other one doesn't. The third one, I don't do it. It's a little cruel, but if you put a piece of meat in a boiling water and a live being, like a mouse, after some time, the meat will be cooked, but the live mouse wouldn't. Again, the difference is in the feedback. And then we go on, and I will talk about automatic control, why we need machines, why we need computers to control something. And this is a very interesting experiment I make. I have this modified bicycle. When you turn the handlebars to the right, the wheels turn to left, and the other way around. And I ask students to ride this bicycle. No one can. It's really hard. It doesn't seem that hard, really. Even for like 2 meters, they can't do it. And if you want to be able to do it, you have to forget what you know about riding a bicycle and learn from the beginning, and then you can do it. And but a machine can do it very easily. So the same algorithm, you just change the sign. That's it. So if you have an algorithm for a normal bicycle with within 2 seconds, you can make it do the other one. But a human being cannot do that. This is a very interesting experiment, and actually the kids love that a lot. So thank you.
Yeah, just one comment about this automation and jobs and so on. Although I share with you the optimism partly because it's our field, every time you talk about automation in these days, people are thinking about much more high-level cognitive tasks. And for example, autonomous vehicles, we are celebrating the advent of autonomous vehicles as better safety, less loss of time. The first question I got asked for an experiment at the University of Melbourne in Victoria was, do you know how many bus drivers will lose their job in Victoria? And it's 47,000 was the answer. I had no idea. But the person on the other side was only interested in the number of jobs that would go immediately. And with 47,000, the answer was there was no way I was going to get funding to have an autonomous bus driving in Melbourne right now until I could give her, it was in this case her, an answer on what would happen to those 47,000 people's jobs. So the question is real, it is being debated, and it is not as easy to say we have had PID controls, we had an industrial revolution and nothing happened. Because the level of cognition that we're talking about, that he's cleaning the room robots are going to do, means that you don't pay for a nanny. My parents don't have a lawnmower, the robot does it. They are real jobs, maybe low level, higher level, but your job as a tutor is on the line as well. Because I have robots in Ghent University running now that students will, or 5-year-old will take before any teacher. So I'm not 100% sure I'm happy with your answer.
Hi everybody, Alberto Leva, Politecnico di Milano, Italy. I have a problem for, well, more than one, but I'll use the first half of my 2 minutes, maybe less, to tell you what my research is, I will say, mostly about over the last years. It's about using control inside computing systems. In parallel with this, let me say that if we want to be multidisciplinary, then our outreach has to be toward people directly involved in automation in the most classical sense of the term, say mechanical, electrical, but also other domains. And computing systems are one domain of election because there is need for more and more automation. Now, there is plenty of research about closing loops around a functional computing system, okay? And it is common opinion that those systems are so complex not to allow for first principle models. Now, my point and the point of, and I'm getting to the problem, is that if computing systems are man-made, then the modeling difficulty is man-made as well. Okay? So we might take away some parts of the computing system that was not designed having a system theoretical attitude in mind. It was designed directly as an algorithm with heuristics. And if we keep it into the loop, this is going to make the model of the whole thing extremely difficult. If you take it out and replace with something more control theoretical, then things can be more easier. Is it clear enough? Okay. Now, to do that, and this is a problem, we need to interact with people from computer science and computer engineering who typically were educated right from the start with a completely prescriptive attitude, not a modeling and control, which means understand the physics, whatever has to be meant for physics, then abstract the model, then reason in the word of models, and then algorithms follow in a non-ambiguous way. Breaking this barrier would be a real breakthrough. I have been trying for some years, and let's say sometimes succeeded, most of the times, I have to admit, failed. Any ideas?
Yeah, I come across that all the time with farmers, actually. Farmers always know to irrigate their land much better than I do, which is totally true. I have absolutely no idea. So in that case, I would suggest a competition. If you know you can do something better than they can, say, look, I totally respect what you're doing. You have really thought this through. You know how to do it. Give me the chance to demonstrate to you that I can do better than you can on fair grounds. And that normally gives evidence to the other party, maybe I don't understand what this person does, but by the way, I should better look at it and understand it. And it gives you good ground for communication afterwards. And normally that's the starting point I have. If you bring something totally disruptive in the market, you need somehow an acceptance. And the only way to accept is to accept yourself that you can fail. And then with that confidence, go in the conversation. And if you fail, you still have learned something because the other side actually knows more than you do, which is a good thing for you. But if you win, then of course the other person has a point to learn. And that's the way I would go forward with it.
Speaking about winning, let me introduce Iven is a winner, a co-winner of Harold Chestnut Engineering textbook. So anyway, this year he, together with his co-author, got award, that Harold Chestnut textbook award, for the book that is written for broad audience. Is it correct? Who knows the book? Who bought the book? Who has? I have for sure. So who knows the title of the book? Can you see? Please educate audience.
The book is called Feedback and Control for Everyone.
So just comment.
Yeah, Feedback and Control for Everyone. And it was basically a very naive, even thinking that...
Sorry, there are people who know.
Okay, thank you. Good, thank you. But we're going to write a second edition, Pedro and I, because I believe he convinced me totally that writing it without any mathematics is probably the only way to go. And the feedback we got from the Springer-Verlag head office was that the for everyone wasn't quite true. Although we do explain that for everyone meant anybody with a high school education of relatively good mathematics. But yeah, everyone does seem to be more than just that. So, yeah.
I would like to take opportunity and bring to your attention that if you really know some textbooks and excellent textbook that you use, or your students love some textbook, please don't forget about nominating that textbook for next triennium, and the call will go by the end probably of this year. So just pay attention and make effort to nominate for next triennium, for next Ifac Congress. That was just, I've heard winning, and I couldn't stop thinking about you as a winner. Anyway, other questions?
Sebastian was
yeah, just following up on your question. Did I understand you right? You were asking about sort of how do we, teach feedback and control to computer science people? Is that okay? So. I don't know exactly how to do it, but I think we should totally aim for that our sort of basic controls class, like Control Systems 1 or whatever, can be attended and maybe should be attended by all technically oriented students. So certainly and definitely including computer science students, and this means that we probably need to change the way that we teach, and I don't see a reason why we can't teach a control class to anyone who has like a basic kind of math background, which computer scientists totally do. But we don't need to, first go into all these maybe a little bit boring stuff about, Fourier transforms, Laplace transform, etc., before we get to the interesting bits about like what can feedback do. And I think we should start with these right away. And then of course, if someone then goes into more detail about control and becomes a control engineer, then we also need all the classical stuff. But totally, the lecture should aim for being accessible for a normal computer science student. And I think that's extremely important also for our field, because otherwise, computer science is taking over possibly some of the things that we do.
Probably this is a bit irritual, so I'm being very short. In fact, I am designing some material for that purpose, but there are some subtle difficulties I am not going to bore the audience with, but if you want to discuss, that will be a pleasure for me. Okay, thank you so much.
I'd be very interested in that.
I wanted also to say that with my probability background and stochastic processes background, I just love to talk to students, engineering students, but also others, to convince them that, the world is not deterministic. The world is full of randomness, uncertainties, and so on. So I don't have any problem to motivate engineering students for taking more and more classes in probability and random processes. But I also have practice that I will share with you, which is extremely good practice, very effective. In the middle of semester, it doesn't matter what course I teach, to energize students, I just bring my former student, who was vice president for engineering working at Google. In fact, he is one about Google Maps. This is Brian McClendon. And then he moved shortly and for a short time to Uber as vice president of Uber. So he has, and now he is really the distinguished professor at back to university with that experience. So when he comes to students and he talks about that real applications and so on, I don't have anyone better advocating for good statistics, that engineering students should know good statistics to deal with data properly, with mostly corrupted data. So those talks and those motivating, inspiring talks, I encourage you, bring to your classroom your former students who are very successful in industry. I found this as the most effective way of motivating students, because when I will tell them that this is very important and so on, it's not the same when he comes and he shares his real industrial experience. Just a thought and just a comment, yeah.
Oh, hi, my name is Stephanie Hull. I'm not a scientist, I'm not an engineer, I'm a publisher. I'm a journals publisher, so this session and the one before have been completely fascinating for me, and education, thank you. I just wondered, and I apologise if you've been asked this a lot of times before, if the panellists could talk a bit about what inspired them to become an engineer, and why you chose that path.
My answer's not going to impress you very much. I had a job all lined up with the electrical industry, and my tutor persuaded me to give it up and do a PhD because he had some money for a PhD and he wanted me to do it. And why did I choose? You know, again, I think that's a difficult question to ask, because when you're 17, 18, especially going back 30 years, it's more than 30 years, that's a bit frightening. The world was different. There was no internet, there was no this, there was, teachers knew nothing, you got no career planning, you got no nothing. You basically, I won't say it was quite eeny, meeny, miny, mo, but you didn't actually have any information. I took engineering because I was good at maths and physics, and I thought it'll probably be useful. I enjoyed maths, I enjoyed physics, and it was the natural thing to do. That's very simplistic, but the world was different over 30 years ago, as I'm sure people in my generation will understand. That's not a very good answer, I think, but what I'm saying is sometimes you happen in these things just by accident, not by design.
We haven't touched in those discussions absolutely fascinating areas of engineering. I call them non-traditional, areas of engineering, such as financial engineering. Many of my students with PhD from MIT and so on, they are now successful and they are owners of hedging companies, and they claim that they use everything, every day, what they learn in courses. So there's another area, my own daughter, who is electrical engineer by PhD, now she found passion fascinating, but she has been always interested in brain. So neuroscience is, again, for engineering students, terrific, wonderful area for getting job. So there are so many now opportunities for engineers that I believe that those who know systems, can you see, I wanted to say stochastic system. Why? Because I really believe that you have to know stochastic systems and control. So I found this we could talk for another session, those opportunities. And Anthony mentioned, everyone mentioned about communication skills, writing skills. Those are absolutely the best skills for getting job, going for interviews and so on. So in other words, there are new opportunities for engineers, very new opportunities, and the door is open. So I look very optimistically, and looking and hearing my daughters being so happy every day, working on big data, the biggest in the world data they have at her institute, which is University of Southern California. So, and hearing from her that fascination and knowing that she had that education in mathematics and electrical engineering, and now she can do really things. I only speed up, and I always beg her, please be fast, because she works on Alzheimer's, she works on post-traumatic brain injury, and so on. So there are those areas, but we have 5 more minutes. If If somebody has very, very short comment, or if not, I will ask panelists for the word of wisdom to close the session. So, is anyone who would like to? Yes, Linda, we still have. Please come here, quickly. This is the best way probably to talk, but you can turn and talk to audience.
Thank you for all the inspiring talks. My name is Jan Benson. I'm teaching at Aalborg University in Denmark. And we've just started a new robotics education. And it's becoming very, very popular. And I saw Sebastian's talk and Linda's talk, and they were very, very inspiring and taking starting points in beautiful robotics, mechanical systems. My question is, how do you get them interested in water? How do you get young people to see that there's actually a lot of other types of dynamical systems that are not necessarily mechanical? Can you even explain that to young people?
I think you can. So maybe it's a bit easier for me in Melbourne because first year engineering is common to all students. There is no such thing as chemical or mechanical or anything like that. And on top of that, as you may have heard from this morning, I'm a strong believer that engineers can not only study with engineers. So I've mixed the class with people from the arts faculty, economics faculty, medical faculty. And there are subjects in there that everybody can take, essentially. We always tackle one kind of open, hairy, audacious problem in the class. And often we will talk about the world problem and then see how they think about it. And then motivate what you do from the different disciplines in order to address these problems, because they never come, I often say, problems don't come with mechanical engineering attached to it. They are a problem, and you may solve them through a legal mechanism, you may solve them through a political mechanism, you may solve them through an engineering problem, solution, and then maybe an electrical and mechanical or a combination of both in there. And that's the type of thinking we try to do in the first year with the students. It doesn't work for everybody, but in principle it allows to have a broader discussion about a topic than just from an engineering perspective, and that helps then later on for them to formulate on how to act on it and so on. So that's, and also for me it gives the advantage that the students out of first year have a much more informed choice of why they pick mechanical engineering as their way of addressing a problem. Because they see, well, that's my aptitude, that's the way I can address it, and I can still make a difference in the world. So that's the way we try. I'm not saying it always works.
10 seconds, or you still want to respond? Okay.
If we have time.
Just to 20 seconds.
Did you asked about like how can we also inspire students for other types of systems rather than mechanical, right? Yes. Okay. So I think most important is that students can somehow relate to what you're talking about, and I think there's many other interesting dynamic systems, like take social dynamics, for instance, or computers that students will be able to relate to. And I think as soon as they relate to it, and as soon as they kind of understand the problem, I think then that's a good way to motivate them. It's true that robotics is kind of easy because it's in fashion, but I think this is also possible for other dynamic systems.
10 seconds each. 10 seconds each. Word of wisdom.
Okay.
Share word of wisdom.
Now your audience, an Indian proverb says, don't criticize me until you have walked 1 mile in my moccasins.
Quickly, Anthony.
I don't think I've got much to add. I think, yeah, know your audience, but I think the other thing I would say, which is perhaps slightly out of today, is you have to remember as well that you are the tutor and they are often the student, and sometimes they need a little bit of tough love.
Sebastian.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, so in the previous session, I think I said that it takes time to, you need to take time to really understand something and really learn something. I also think it takes time to do good outreach activities and to do good teaching. The key is to think about what you want to deliver and how you best deliver it for your audience.
Linda?
I would add to that for everybody to actually try to do outreach. I know it's actually a big effort, like Sebastian was saying, but try it. If it's even 3 hours or 1 hour or 20 minutes in one of our STEM sessions or a week long, yeah.
I would add giving back, I will follow. Giving back is the most rewarding activity. So try to give back to your community. And thank you to panelists. And thank you very much. We still have 3 days or 2 days, so let us talk, let us enjoy the Congress. Thank you very much, and just enjoy what you do. Thank you.
See you tomorrow morning.
See you tomorrow morning.